You will find this very interesting. Well, I did. And we might get something exciting in from it. We're looking for news of a man named Alan Thornton on the programme this morning. There's a remarkable story told about him, and we'd love to find out more about him. And Ronan Kelly, our own Ronan Kelly, who is the series producer, is here with the details. And by the way, our number is 1850 715 105. Good morning, Ronan. Tell me, hey, who is Alan Thornton?
Alan Thornton has an amazing story, and we would really love to hear the end of the story. But the beginning of the story, as far as we know, is that Alan Thornton, in his late teens, joined the Irish Air Corps as a trainee pilot. He was in a class of 11 in Baldonnel, and one of his classmates was a man named Tommy McKeown, or is a man named Tommy McKeown, who incidentally flew the Pope into Ireland in 1979 and is still hale and hearty and living in Malahide. But one of his classmates in the class with Alan Thornton remembers that Alan was a little bit different from everybody else.
Right. Can I just cut? What year are we talking about here?
We're talking August 1939,
right.
So 1 month before the start of the Second World War. And as I say, I talked to Tommy about Alan and what Alan was like, and he said Alan was quite different, and he first realised this when they were issued with their revolvers.
The first day that we were issued with their revolvers, I was in the room next to Thornton, and the next thing I heard a shot. It was Alan that had been fooling with his gun, and the shot lodged in the bottom of the window frame.
So
I can see he took a very disciplined attitude to things.
Yeah, that's right. He was interested. He was interested in technology and planes and guns and the whole idea of being in the army. But they never got a chance to use those revolvers. Alan and Tommy, as I say, joined the Air Corps in August 1939. The Second World War started a month later for the rest of Europe, but not for Ireland. It was the emergency, as you know, here, and it was mostly a phony war here. And Tommy describes the kind of confusion and frustration that surrounded being in the army here during the emergency.
Dennis Cousins and I were in town, and when we came back to Baldonnel, there was a general alert on an invasion was expected, but they weren't sure whether it was going to be Germans or British. So we were all sent out. We got into uniform. We were sent out around the camp. I remember in the far side of Baldonnel with about 10 or 20 men. They had 3 or 3 rifles, and I had a revolver, 45, which wouldn't shoot down pigeons even. But the chaplain came around and gave general absolution to us all.
This would be absolving you of all your sins.
Oh, we were all being absolved.
Did you have a lot of sins?
We were getting rid of a heavy load. So we were out around the camp for most of the night, and the whole thing was called off in the morning. But of course it was frustrating.
Why was it frustrating?
Well, to be out there with about 10 or 20 men, not knowing what was going to happen, how we were going to be invaded. And as well as that, the aeroplanes that were supposed to fly and defend the country were pushed out on the aerodrome as obstacles. None of them were flown. And that was frustrating.
He sounds positively disappointed that we weren't attacked, if you don't mind my saying so.
He does in a way, and in a moment you'll hear from one of the other classmates. The initial training, who will underline that, the initial training, they say, was great fun because, okay, they went in, the Air Corps is part of the army, so they went in, they had to do a month of marching. They had to learn how to march, and that was obviously important for military discipline. But then, after a month, they were in the air straight away, and they said they got great training, and they learned standard flying, but they also learned aerobatics, which was fascinating for them.
And presumably, given the time we're talking about, this was seriously exotic stuff to be up there flying in a plane.
I can imagine if there was a class of only 11 people, and you know, if there was the kind of emigration that we hear of, and you got a chance to stay in the country and you got a chance to join, you know, the Aer Lingus would have been tiny. No, there would have been no Aer Lingus at the time probably, and it would have been pretty exotic and pretty exciting to be in the army. So another classmate, Dennis Cousins, I talked to him and he showed me his logbook from the time, and they had to write down everything that they did in the air. And one entry was for the day he learnt the aerobatics of flicks.
You pulled the stick back sharply and kicked the rudder sharply, so the plane flicked over.
And that's the kind of stuff you'd see in war movies.
Yes.
Isn't it? A sort of evasive action.
Yeah, see, it would be very good if you were flying and you were being attacked from the back. You did this suddenly and you were going back under the fellow that was attacking you. Right. And then you could perhaps recover and start shooting at him.
I presume this never happened, did it?
It didn't. What happened after their training, after their exciting training in Baldonnel, was that all the young cadets were sent to Rhinana, which became Shannon Airport, excuse me, in the Midwest. But further from Shannon Airport you couldn't get. They were out in the middle of nowhere. They were 4 miles down a dirt track from the Limerick-Ennis Road. There was an officers' mess there, and they spent 2 years there. And they were stuck out in the middle of the marshlands on the end of the Shannon. And it was a purgatory on earth. And their job was to patrol our 12-mile limit. Okay, off the west coast of Ireland. That was one job. And then the other job they had to do was fly this aeroplane. It was called a Supermarine Walrus, which was an amphibious aeroplane. And they had to fly that up several thousand feet and take meteorological readings and then fly back down and send them back up to Dublin. So it was pretty crushingly boring stuff, as Dennis and Tommy describe.
There was nothing to do. We're bored, completely bored.
Could you go to a pub or anything?
No, there were no pubs. There was across about 2 miles, there was a very primitive pub which is known as the Honk. Occasionally we used to go, but, there were no roads. You just walked across fields and jumped over ditches. It was, I'd say, 2 or 3 miles.
And I can't imagine if you had a few drinks on you trying to find your way
this
home.
This is it, yeah.
Occasionally, you'd have some German aircraft would fly overhead. And I remember one occasion talking to whoever was the artillery officer there. I said, "Why don't you take a few shots at him?" And he sort of thought I was mad. They never did anything about them.
And did you have any encounters with anyone? Did you ever come across enemy aircraft or anything like that?
Yes, a couple of times during coastal patrols. So English planes coming back from the Atlantic.
And what was the procedure there?
You just flew past each other and waved or nodded or didn't pay much attention.
What were you defending the West Coast against?
Well, I don't know what we were defending. There was any threat of an invasion, but even if there had been an invasion, we wouldn't have had the forces to repel them.
Were you afraid at all with what was going on in Europe?
Oh no, not a bit. We were only hoping to get involved.
You wanted to get involved in the war?
Oh yes, very disappointed. Hoping to shoot down enemy aeroplanes. Didn't occur to us that we might be shot down first. Or...
You had a kind of a boy's own view of the...
Yes, I think so.
Isn't it amazing? Isn't it just amazing? I mean, they were really heartbroken that they weren't being shot at.
Yeah, isn't it incredible? And these guys would have been 17, 18, 19, 20. And you wonder whether young fellas nowadays would have a similar sanitised view of the war, whether it would have been Bickles and Boys Own in the same way nowadays, that we've seen so many pictures of the war. And Dennis there at the time said there was an ambivalence towards the Germans and the British. And, they were, as young trainee cadets, watching the war from the sidelines. And it was only when they then knew people who went and joined the British forces that they came down on the side and they decided that, the Nazis should be defeated and the Germans should be defeated. But at that time, it was a game they weren't allowed to get involved in, and they were obviously very frustrated by that.
Well, and of course we were officially neutral.
Yes.
And how did Alan Thornton handle all
Well, you see, according to the two lads, this went very bad on Alan, right? Because Alan loved flying and fantasised about flying. So Alan would talk... in the mess and in the camp about flying across the Atlantic and how exciting flying across the Atlantic would be. So he was ahead of his time in a lot of ways. And he would talk about flying Hurricanes, and he would love to fly Hurricanes. And these were the kind of planes they should be flying, and they should be doing exciting things in dogfights and that type of thing. But not in Shannon. They're stuck out in the middle of, as I say, the marshland on the edge of the River Shannon. They're defending our 12-mile limit, Marian. They're flying very slow, relatively slow aircraft, not aerobatical aircraft, and as there was nothing else to do. Dennis did mention that there was an officer's mess, and if you had a mind to become an alcoholic, you could, because really that was all you could do, was to go into the officer's mess. So Alan got very frustrated and very restless and very antsy, and it all came to a head in January 1942. So they had been there about 2 years, and there was a visit one day of senior officers to the camp in Rhinana.
What happened was there was a big of Rhinana that day. Lieutenant, how was Mickey Joe Coster's title? Lieutenant Colonel, and we were all in the mess while he was addressing us.
Alan, for some reason now, which I've forgotten, was in the bad books at the time, and he was under what is known as open house arrest.
And the next thing we heard, this aircraft starting up, taking off.
And we all came out, and it was Alan. He had got 2, I think, ground staff to go with him, and he decided to fly to the continent.
And we believe that he was going to join the Luftwaffe, that he was going to France.
Quite extraordinary,
Isn't it?
isn't it? They're all sitting inside. He steals the plane, steals 2 ground staff, it would appear, as well, and off he goes.
I don't know. The story told afterwards is that the ground staff were only too happy for the bit of the jaunt.
Because they were bored rigid
They were
as
bored
well.
rigid as well. And we don't know whether there was 2 or 3. I believe there's a Corporal Kelleher involved. And then the other names that are mentioned are a McGovern and a Tobin. And that one was a private soldier as well. So, but they were bored too. So this man, Alan, is under arrest from the army authorities. He's had some sort of a row with the army authorities. The big brass are inside in the room briefing everybody, and they all hear the plane taking off. They're all run out, and Alan is in there with a couple of the boys waving bye-bye and taking off and heading, they thought at the time, for Cherbourg, which was in occupied France, to join with the Luftwaffe and see a little bit of action.
Was there something about... Why was he in bad odour with the authorities?
I don't know.
You don't know?
I've no
Right.
idea at the
Okay.
time, and Dennis and Tommy don't know either why he was in. Why the problem was.
It wasn't something to do with a woman or something like that.
I've no idea. I don't know
Right,
about
okay.
that. So
Anyway, here he is, heading off, flying to Cherbourg to join the Luftwaffe.
to join the Luftwaffe in this amphibious aircraft, the Supermarine Walrus, which was used, as I say, for meteorological soundings, and they got to Cornwall. And here the story differs, but ultimately what happened was they were forced to land in St. Avel in Cornwall, which was an RAF aerodrome. The RAF sent up a couple of Spitfires, apparently. Didn't know whether they were, because it was a British airplane, they didn't know were they theirs or were they Dutch resistance or what were they, whatever. And eventually worked out that they were Irish with the roundel or the tricolour on it. And they landed in St. Avel in Cornwall. They think they may have run out of fuel. And they were placed under arrest, and Tommy was sent over with another pilot to bring the plane back. And when he arrived in Euston Station, there was a British Army officer there, RAF officer there, waiting to meet him. And he was very worried because he thought these 2 guys coming from Ireland wouldn't be able to speak English and he wouldn't be able to communicate with them. And eventually they went down to the aerodrome. Tommy wasn't let into the aerodrome initially because he wasn't a senior officer and because of secrecy and things like that. And then they brought the plane back. And Alan was arrested, and I'm presuming the other men were arrested as well, but we don't know. But Alan was arrested. And he was brought back to Ireland and he was court-martialled. And he was court-martialled in Cork for some reason. And I don't know whether that was for reasons of secrecy or to avoid publicity, but there was no publicity at the time.
Right.
He was court-martialled in Cork and he was charged with various charges like larceny, absent without leave, losing by neglect arms and ammunition, and the best sounding of all, which was conduct to the prejudice of good order and military discipline. And I think he'd cow low now before a charge like that. And he was found guilty, and he was sentenced to 18 months in Portlaoise prison with no hard labour.
Right.
Which was...
That was a tough...
I thought that was
Mind you,
pretty...
actually, no. You know, there's a war going on.
Yeah.
You steal one of your own country's planes. We're supposed to be neutral. You head off to occupied France to join the...
But you know what had happened nowadays? You'd get counselling. You know, you'd have some fella going, he was depressed or whatever. You know, you'd see the bigger picture or whatever. But obviously at the time, and maybe there was some references made at the time to his, whether he's depressed or not, being
Right.
stuck out in Shannon. But anyway, he was released after 18 months. The war is still going on. And Tommy McKeown met him sometime after his release.
When he got out, I met him at Dublin Airport, but he told me that he was finding it very difficult to get a job because he had a record. So then he went and he joined the RAF, and he was a fighter pilot in Greece. I don't know how many he shot down or not, but I've never heard anything about him since that.
And, I mean, you'd love to hear about him, obviously.
We'd love to know, yeah. If anyone out there can tell us, did he get to Greece? Did he get to fly his beloved Hurricanes? What happened after the RAF? Was he actually trying to go and join the Luftwaffe? And what his life has been like since? Because a lot of these other people who were in the class went on to very interesting lives in aviation afterwards.
Right.
And they got a very good training, and they got great opportunities, having the chance to learn from the Air Corps the basics of flying, and you know, it was a good education that set them up for life in aviation, if they were interested in aviation.
So you've lost track of him where?
The latest I heard was that he was in Britain. He was in East Grinstead in Britain. And the plane, interestingly enough, is in a museum in Britain, in Somerset, in the Fleet Air Arm Museum in Yeovilton. And there's a link on our webpage if you want to go and have a look at it. And it is the actual plane that was robbed.
The actual.
It ended up on a dump in Britain after having been owned by Aer Lingus for a while, but never apparently being used by Aer Lingus, then bought by a flying club in Britain to be used for bathing parties. I don't know how they used this. And it ended up on a dump, and it was bought by an aviation restoration group for £5 sterling, and is restored and was put in this museum in 1966 and is still there in Yeovilton in Somerset.
Right. In fact, I'm looking at a picture of it here. Yeah, just so people can get it off the website. Well, now, as I say, that's all we know about Alan Thornton at the moment. Originally came from Rathgar in Dublin, but after he left Ireland during the war, we'd love to know what happened to him, what motivated him to steal the aircraft. Did he want to join the Luftwaffe? And did he end up fighting against the Luftwaffe in Greece? We've a call about Alan from someone who knows what happened to him when he left the RAF. Now, I'll take a break and we'll go to that caller. Also, we'd love to know what happened to the other men in the stolen plane, as Ronan said, because they could probably clue us in on a bit too. One was a Corporal Kelleher, and there may have been the man called Tobin, and a man named McGovern as passengers too. And as Ronan said, that picture is available if you go on to www.rte.ie, and you'll see a picture of it in the museum in Britain. But anybody out there who can help us on the whereabouts or what happened to Alan Thornton, we'd really love to hear from them. Welcome back to the programme. Now we're talking about Alan Thornton, and we would love to find out.
Discounts are in comparison to booking by telephone or travel agent. Applies to special offer fares only. Credit card fee applied.
See how it's preserved for future generations at our exhibition Keeping the Books, running until May 1st. The Chester Beatty Library in the Gardens of Dublin Castle. RTE supporting the arts.
Welcome back to the programme. Now we're talking about Alan Thornton, and we would love to find out what happened to him after he disappeared out of Ireland flying one of our planes, by the way. Well, no, then of course he came back. Now, Donald McCarran, good morning to you.
Good morning. Who am I speaking to?
My name is Marian Finucane.
Hello, Marian.
Now, you are originally from County Clare in Ireland.
Yes.
Living
county.
in England.
Yes.
You knew Alan?
I did, yes. Fine chap. Nice man.
Tell me about him. What happens? I mean, can you describe to me, was it just boredom that made him steal the plane?
Well, yes, I suppose so. As a matter of fact, I'm looking at one of my own books here, which gives me, if I can find the spot, I've written, like others, the pilot, that's Alan, was finding life at Rhinana, a damp and isolated spot, very boring, flying the coastal patrol, often in outrageous weather, taxed his morale and that of some technicians. Also, he was under open arrest for some small misdemeanour.
Do you know what the small misdemeanour was?
I do.
What was it?
Well, it involved a young lady, nothing sordid or anything like that, but I don't feel I should go into it. Anyhow...
Well, I mean, why would was this a relationship with a woman?
Well, yes, he was dating this girl, and I think her other boyfriend, the girl and the chap who was a German in a strong man in Duffy's Circus, which was appearing in Limerick. Some of your older listeners would remember Duffy's Circus.
But why would you get into trouble with the Air Corps because you were dating a woman?
Well, I think the big German strongman objected. There might have been a bit of to do about it. But nothing very sordid, but as I think I heard earlier, prejudicial to good order and discipline. And they were all young. So all those chaps, incidentally, they had been commissioned in April 1940, so they weren't cadets when they were down in Rhinana, where I met some of them. They were second lieutenants, but that's a minor detail.
What happened to Alan Thornton when he went to Britain?
Well, first of all, yes. Well, he joined the RAF, fully trained, and might I say, a very good and natural pilot, way above average pilot. He joined the RAF, and as you say, he was in the Mediterranean area, and he mentioned some of the incidents to me, but he collected what we used to call a few medals, a few gongs, as we used to say.
But if he had been brought down by the RAF when he was in a stolen plane, where he shouldn't have been, and for which he was subsequently jailed in Ireland, how come they accepted him into the RAF?
By God, you mean to... Of course they would accept him, a fully trained pilot who had a little bit of hijinks. They were all young.
Yeah, but he was thinking of joining the Luftwaffe, which was the enemy.
Well, I'm sure he didn't tell them that. As a matter of fact, when he was forced down to St. Ivel, the first man up to the plane has an Irish connection, because he was Lord Shackleton, a Labour peer, and subsequently, and a son of Shackleton, the great explorer.
Oh, really?
From County Meath. So, I suppose, what was his name? Hugh Shackleton came up to, he was the air intelligence officer on that RAF base, came up to him and said, I suppose he saw the orange on the roundels, the markings of the aircraft, and he said, you know, you Dutch fellas aren't based here, you're based further down at St. Magran or something like that. So Thornton, Alan, incidentally his proper name was Aloysius J. Thornton.
Nice.
And
you obviously liked him.
Beg your pardon?
You liked him.
I was a super bloke. I'd love to have been old enough to fly at that stage myself.
Have you any contact with him now?
No, I lost contact with Alan, and the last I heard of, he used to live down in East Grinstead, which is Sussex or Surrey way. Met him a few times, had lunch with him. Lovely chap. Actually, having sold his wild oats, he was very quiet. How should I put it? Retiring type, modest type of chap. And then I heard some years ago from a fellow Air Corps officer that Alan had returned to Ireland, and I'd love to see him if he's still in the land of the living.
Yeah, we'd love to talk to him
But,
too. His father had a connection with Michael Collins.
Yes, Michael Collins was a cousin of mine, actually. Thornton,
God, connections within connections.
I think he was a commandant, the father, and he was, you know, Collins's fight against the British was very much orientated towards good intelligence, and Commandant Thornton was one of his intelligence officers. And another thing I should mention about Alan, he was a first-class athlete. I forget what school he went to in Dublin, but in running, he won all the forum.
Right.
He was great.
Okay, well listen, thank you very much indeed for talking to us. That's Donal McCarran, and the mystery remains unsolved, I suppose you could say, but we would love to hear from Alan Thornton or anybody who knows where he is. Think about it, and if you can help us, call us on 1857 15105. I presume, Ronan, all the things like looking it up in the phone book and all that, that's all been done.
Called a lot of Thorntons.
Okay, he sounds like an extraordinary guy.
He does, and I'd love to hear the end of his story, or the update on his story.
Right. Okay, we'll take a break.